So when we talk about being big or acting big when you're a smaller company, there are two things that I like to think about. Number one, because we're in a heavily regulated industry, that you understand the laws and regulations at the federal level and the state level, right? That's the most important thing to do, because otherwise you may lose your ability to actually conduct your business. Secondly, the back office isn't really the sexiest topic to talk about, but it's really important. So I'm going to be focusing more on the legal aspects of the business, and part of that is really starting off with your organization. So many of you may have companies, you may have incorporated, you may have a limited liability company, you may have a partnership. Depending on what type of structure you have, it really doesn't matter. You still want to maintain proper record keeping. So at a minimum, on an annual basis, it's good to review who your directors or officers are going to be. If you have a limited liability company, it may be your members or your managers. And a partnership, again, the same thing. So you meet annually, you talk about what your goals are or different opportunities that you may have, and then record them. For instance, if you're looking to build a distillery or you need working capital and you need to obtain a loan, well, that's something that's pretty significant, so you would like to record that. You would have that in your meeting minutes. Again, if you had a new officer or a new member that became a shareholder or an equity partner in your business, that is something that you would record as well. From a corporate compliance standpoint, again, heavily regulated, we have licenses and permits that allow us to actually conduct our business. So it's important to make sure that you know when those licenses or permits expire, if there are any filings that you need to make. For instance, if you were to get a new member come into your business, you give them some equity, you'll have to update your federal permits or your state licenses. So this way you keep everything up to date with the organizations and make those timely filings. In addition, if you have FET taxes or any other filings that you need to make, again, it's good to keep it on a schedule. So again, you know, a little tedious, but if you plan ahead, it'll be much smoother. Growing your company. Starting off, you may start off small and maybe two friends getting together. It could be a husband and wife. It could be a group of people that have a common interest. And when you start to grow, you're going to be hiring employees or possibly independent contractors. So employees, you know who they are. They come on, they're working for you full time. And independent contractors generally are people that may come on because you can't afford to bring them on full time, or they may be working on a project basis. You may have a new launch, you may be launching a new product, so you may bring them on just for a short period of time, but it's always good to document them properly, so this way, are you issuing them a W-2 form as an employee? Are you issuing a 1099 if they're an independent contractor? Now, most of the times, if you have employees, you won't have an employment agreement for them. Those are usually reserved for executives or managerial level employees because they have a lot more detail into the terms and conditions of their employment. On the flip side, with an independent contractor agreement, generally what you'll do is you'll add a type of scope of work for the work that they'll be doing, and that also dictates what it will cost to hire that person or that project. And then lastly, it could be included in any of the agreements, or there can be a standalone. You'll have a non-compete, non-solicitation, or a confidentiality agreement. Those are terms that generally protect you in case somebody, either a project ends or the employment period ends. You don't want somebody to go over and work with a competitor. Non-solicitation generally refers to someone who leaves and they work closely with somebody on your team or a couple of people, but they decide to take them and move over to their new employer. That's really devastating for a business, especially a small one. And lastly, confidentiality agreements. If somebody is an employee or working on a project in your organization, it's good to have that in place too, so if they leave, that they don't go and disclose anything that you're working on. So again, when you're a smaller company, you may not think of things like an employee handbook or a guide or compliance guidelines. But again, when you build the foundation of your business, you start off small, but with the anticipation that you're going to grow. So if you put these guidelines in place, it'll make it much easier as people come on board and they're not always chasing, trying to update them. So employee guidelines generally include, what are the terms of employment for somebody? What type of paid time off do they have? What is the review process? God forbid there's a harassment issue. Who do they report that to? So you put in these basic terms and conditions so people understand what to expect from the organization and also what you expect of the employees. Now in the compliance guidelines or the company policies, because we're in a heavily regulated industry, I usually like to include compliance guidelines as they relate to federal and state regulations so employees know, can I talk to a retailer? Can I give them something of value? Am I allowed to pay a slotting fee to get my product on a shelf? Both of those answers are no, just in case anybody had any questions. But again, sometimes you're going to get somebody, maybe you get a great marketer, but they're not from the industry. Maybe they were selling soap or diapers previously. They're not really aware of all the regulations. So if you have something in your handbook, that will help guide them and help them do a better job. And then probably the most important thing is being consistent. Unfortunately, we live in a time where you hear about different lawsuits, whether it's harassment or discrimination. And here's just a simple example. If Sally comes to you and says, I have my vacation time and I want to go to Europe for 2 weeks straight and I'm going to go visit my family. And you say, okay, I really like Sally. She can go visit her family. That's great. Then Joe comes up to you and says, hey, you know what? I want to go ride my motorcycle with a bunch of buddies of mine. I'm going to do it for 2 weeks. And then you say no. Well, why is it okay for Sally to go visit her family, but Joe can't go on the motorcycle ride? So again, this is just a simple example, but you want to be able to be consistent because you don't want there to be any claims of discrimination. Compliance training, getting back to the guidelines, always a great idea to work with your team members just to reinforce what can and can't be done in the industry. Importation and distribution agreements. Sometimes this can be a tricky topic. So when you're starting out in the business, you may start off in one state. You start off small, you're distributing your products, and everything is good. Then you start to grow, which is what we want, right? That's the ultimate goal. So then you want to branch out into different states and you meet with different distributors. Now, not all distributors or importers are created equally. So I always suggest that people go and talk to various people in the industry to get a feel for what they may offer. The biggest issue that people come across, and they're usually not aware of it, is that franchise states are states where, by statute, you will enter into a relationship with a supplier, but you may not be able to get out of that relationship, which sounds a little crazy, right? You're like, well, how could that be? I don't even have a written agreement. How could I be bound by the terms of this? Well, they're governed by statute. And if you don't have a clear understanding before you enter into that relationship, you may be stuck. It'll be a pretty ugly marriage that you can't get out of. Now, under statute, generally you can get out of that relationship if there's something called good cause, but depending on that particular state, it may vary. And the most, disconcerting issue is if you don't have a written agreement, but you're talking to this person, you have a distributor, say, oh, I like your product, here, why don't you let me try it? I'll see what I can do. Let me see how many accounts I can get it in. You're like, wait, I don't have an agreement, why not? They do it, they have it for a period of time, but that conduct could demonstrate that you actually have a relationship. So it's always good to test the waters, but to talk to people, because the other thing is, when you're smaller, you may say, I want to talk with this broker, he seems really nice, but in 3 years, I'm expecting to grow to X, and then when I do, then I'm going to transfer over to the bigger wholesaler. Well, that may be your plan, but that may not be what happens. So it's always good to just look forward and see what your options are. Intellectual property, it can cover trademarks, copyrights, and patents. I'm going to focus on trademarks since we're very brand focused. So sometimes clients will go out there, they come across a name and they love it. They said, this is the brand. I'm going out with it. You know, no one can stop me. They get their product, they get the juice in the bottles, they label them, they get distribution. Lo and behold, someone comes out and they send them a cease and desist letter. Well, you know, you're infringing on my trademark. And you'll say, well, what are you talking about? This is my brand. Look at all the money and time I spent into developing it. It's like, too bad, you don't have a federal registration. So I always encourage people to search. Do a simple Google search. Find out if that name is out there, if anybody else is using it. There may be a cola that's registered that has that name. So it's always good to just double check before you fall in love with a brand. But the best thing you can do, conduct a search, apply for a federal trademark application, and then once you get it, you can protect it, and you could send the cease and desist letters out to other people who possibly try and infringe on your mark. And then once you have it, you would just want to make sure that no one else is using it. And then lastly, when you're smaller, you're always looking to grow. And part of that growth, you may need additional working capital. So you may look to raise money. So I always think it's a good idea to have advisors that are around you, because again, this is what bigger companies do, right? They look, they talk to advisors, they may talk to their board. And when you have the advisors, they can help guide you in ways that you may not have realized if you were just doing it yourself. It's always good to have an attorney, always good to have an accountant. I strongly suggest have a banker, but have a banking relationship with somebody in person, not online, because again, you'll get a lot more out of that relationship. You could have your board of directors, your board of managers, and also your partners, or other advisors that may help guide you. And then you can look and see what type of money that you may need to raise, what type of capital. Many people may have started with friends and family. They may have then gone to angel investors because they needed a little more working capital, or you know, you can get bigger and then maybe look to venture capitalists. So depending on what type of investment you're trying to raise, whether it's debt or equity, it's always good to make sure that you have proper documentation. The reason why I say this is, unfortunately, I had a client that was looking to raise some funds, and they were trying to save some money, which I can totally understand, but they had a document that somebody gave them, and it was for, you know, one entity, but not the type of entity that they had. Then the document was missing some key components, because again, when you're raising money, this is a legal document, and you're bound by the terms of it. So there's certain reps and warranties that you need to put in there. So unfortunately, they came to me, and then I looked at it, and then I had to rework it. And sometimes it's easier to start from scratch than try to rework somebody else's product. So that's just a little tidbit for something that I've been dealing with in the last week. And then also there are programs that are available to you through the state and federal level. So again, the reason why I brought up these documents and just trying to keep the back office in order is because most of the people that I talk to start out small, and their goal is to eventually sell their company, or you know, enter into a joint venture or acquire another company. If you go through the due diligence process, if somebody's going to acquire you, they're going to look to those documents, and they're going to want to see what documents you have, who signed what are the terms, and it'll make your life much easier to do so if you have that all taken care of before you go down that road, because you don't want them to cancel the deal or reduce the purchase price. So again, try to keep your back office nice and neat, and thank you.